Alright, welcome back to Wrestling Retold and Relived with Richie Mars. I, of course, am your humble, gracious host, Richie Mars, and I'm going solo today, but there is a good reason for it. Did have an episode in line for today, but unfortunately, only half of it got recorded. Now, I will amend that next week, but this week I have a little bit of something special for you all. Now, this is something that I've had in the works for a little bit, and I'm excited to share it with you, and it's kind of a different take on my usual episodes here, which is either with a guest or a topic, and it's a highly opinionated kind of show, but this is a little bit different. And it is more documentary based. It's something that I would like to do a little bit more of in the future. It's a lot more research, it's a lot more telling from all sides, and it's about stuff that really does interest me within the wrestling business. Now, before I get started, I will say that there are some trigger warning type of material within this story. So there's going to be some timestamps in the description below. And if you don't want to listen, then those are the timestamps that you will skip and continue the story. And what story is that, you may be wondering? Well, it is the story of Stone Cold Steve Austin and his infamous walkout of WWE in 2002. Now, there was a lot of things that happened during this time, and the reactions of Austin, the reactions of WWE and people close to Austin, and the entirety of the story in general. And it's going to be a little bit different than my usual podcast, but I hope you give it a chance and enjoy, and always appreciative of any feedback. So, without further ado, let's get started. Babe Ruth, Michael Jordan, Tiger Woods, Michael Phelps. There are very few names that can claim that they defined a generation of a sport. Stone Cold Steve Austin was that man for professional wrestling's top company, the World Wrestling Federation, in the late 90s. Records of all kinds seemingly broke on a weekly basis with Austin at the helm, from ratings to merchandise to WWF's mainstream popularity. Fast forward to 2002, WWF has dipped in all those aforementioned categories, and things have changed. From more writers formatting the show, dividing the superstars to two separate rosters, even changing the last letter of WWF to E. However, on June 10th, 2002, WWE was not prepared for the biggest change to their company. A change that fast-forwarded their rapid downward spiral in creativity and popularity. Stone Cold Steve Austin, the number one star in the company, walked out, vowing never to return. But why? Why would Austin leave a company that helped make him a universal star? A company he helped become a global juggernaut? To answer that question, we have to go back to March 15th, 2002. 2 days before WWE's biggest show of the year, WrestleMania, Steve Austin was interviewed for Bite This, a WWE.com exclusive web show about the current direction of the company. I ain't excited about some of the direction the company is taking, and the way business is being done from a writing standpoint. I've got no problem with an individual talent, but I'm just watching and being very patient, waiting to see what happens, the reasons that everything happens, and that it's done for the right reasons. I think a lot of things are done for the wrong reasons now, and there are guys being sacrificed. Hopefully everything will work out, I'll leave it at that. That was the first hint of creative dissatisfaction Austin had with his employer. But was he right? The prior year, WWE bought their biggest competition, World Championship Wrestling, WCW. The competition that arguably pushed them to their creative heights. Since then, the dip in quality in the writing was noticeable. with a confusing invasion storyline that saw the defunct WCW and ECW Extreme Championship Wrestling superstars trying to take over WWE that gained little fan interest along the way, with Steve Austin's heel turn towards the dark side by teaming up with hated rival and real-life WWE chairman Vince McMahon. Many fans thought this was the jump the shark moment that caused fans to tune out of the now only major pro wrestling company in the United States. With no pressure from outside forces, WWE could afford to hit cruise control in some respects. Austin was unsatisfied with that concept. To spice up the WWE roster, Vince McMahon hired Hulk Hogan, Kevin Nash, and Scott Hall, the founding members of the controversial and successful WCW faction, the NWO, the New World Order. Steve Austin is to Hulk Hogan to what Mike Tyson to Muhammad Ali was, two defining leaders in different eras of the sport they helped cultivate. Now here they are in the same company. Surely it's a no-brainer to square these two up at WWE's grandest stage of them all. Except, Austin wasn't having it. Jim Ross, former head of WWE Talent Relations, famed wrestling commentator, and close friend of Austin, reveals the reason as to why that was the case on his Grilling JR podcast. Vince knew that Steve would want to go at a breakneck pace. He was kind of the middle linebacker in the squared circle, and he liked to hit people and he liked to be aggressive. And obviously, no one thought that Hogan could maintain that on a given calendar here. But Steve just didn't have a good gut feeling that they would have a passable chemistry and just to be passable. What is good enough for Austin, he couldn't live with himself, if that's what he was doing. That left Austin with little options. He faced Kurt Angle and The Undertaker multiple times in the previous year, Chris Jericho the pay-per-view before, he faced The Rock at the previous WrestleMania, Triple H was occupied due to winning the Royal Rumble. That left Austin with few opponents to work with. Scott Hall was the opponent that WWE Creative landed on. Austin was not amused, thinking it was just some thrown-together match on the card. Scott Hall recalled on the You're Welcome with Chael Sonnen podcast being pitched the idea of working with Austin. Vince made the decision. He looked at me and Kevin, he goes, "I'll have one of you, probably Scott, wrestle Steve with the other guy on the outside." The reason Kevin Nash wasn't chosen was due to his closeness with Austin. According to his Click This podcast, Kevin Nash had this to say: "Me and Austin, I was as close as you can get. I was runner-up. I was Miss Congeniality at WrestleMania 18. Steve and I were too close. He didn't want to beat me. I would have done the job in a heartbeat." In the days leading up to WrestleMania 18, the decision was made for Austin to lose to Hall. The original finish up until Sunday was Scott and I were going to beat Steve, and then The Rock was going to go over to Hogan, and then we were to come down and give heat on Rock and leave WrestleMania with heat, which would be the first time, I think, in WrestleMania history that, that somebody would leave with their heat, Nash recalls. While not entirely true with being the first bad guys leaving with their heat at the grandest stage of them all, the plan was set for the NWO to make their mark on the WrestleMania stage. This would also be the rumored return of former NWO member X-Pac that would assist in giving Hall the win, continuing the Austin NWO story. Sounds simple, right? Except no one told Steve Austin the plan. I heard about it, the writing team saying, "Well, we're going to do a heat thing with Austin. We're going to beat him with Scott," Jim Ross recalls. "Have you communicated that with the talent?" "Oh, no, we haven't said a word, it's just between us and Vince," recalled Jim Ross talking with the writing staff that day. JR confronted Vince McMahon about the decision. When McMahon admitted that he was thinking about beating Austin, Ross told him how monumental of a mistake that would be. Ross knew Austin was already upset with being in a program with Hall, and losing would tank Austin's morale into the ground. "It was thrown together with short-term thinking," Ross said of Steve Austin Scott Hall's program. In the end, the finish of the match was changed to Steve Austin defeating Scott Hall. There are conflicting reports on what happened at WrestleMania week that caused the change. Jim Ross's version was Scott Hall was partying the night before the event and that he was in rough condition when he arrived. Steve Austin blew a gasket and demanded the angle end, and that was the nail in the coffin for the NWO reboot in WWE. Kevin Nash's version was that Scott Hall was on Antabuse, a drug that makes the user sick if they were in the vicinity of alcohol, along with other pills, and the news that Scott Hall was going to be losing at WrestleMania, along with the schedule taking a toll on his body, was the cause of the relapse back into alcohol abuse. Despite the rumors, Austin claimed he never had a problem with Scott Hall. People said I had heat with Scott Hall or Scott Hall had heat with me. I like the guy. He's had his problems or whatever, that's his stuff he's got to deal with. I like working with the guy, but you can't expect him to come in here, get over in a couple months, and be in a WrestleMania match. Wrestling Scott Hall 5th from the top at WrestleMania left Steve Austin fried. He skipped the annual post-WrestleMania party and went home, skipping the Monday Night Raw taping and was not seen on television for 2 weeks. While he was gone, the landscape of WWE was changing. Former head writer of WWE Raw, Brian Gewirtz, recalls in his autobiography there's just one problem with that, the big shift that would occur on WWE television. Shortly after WrestleMania 18, Stephanie McMahon, now the head of the creative department, came into the writer's room with Vince and announced that the company would be undergoing a brand split, with different talents going exclusively to Raw and SmackDown. Steve Austin returned on the April 1st, 2002 edition of Raw, with his return storyline deciding on which show he would be on, with Raw being the ultimate destination. His featured matches in the coming months were a loss to The Undertaker at Backlash and a number 1 contenders match for the WWE Undisputed Championship, a win over the newest member of the NWO, Big Show, at Insurrection, and a win over Big Show and Ric Flair at Judgment Day in a handicap match. None of them were main eventing their respective shows. Despite the tensions growing between both Austin and WWE, Austin requested and was given a program with WWE Intercontinental Champion Eddie Guerrero, who returned after WrestleMania 18. Vignettes were shot at a bar during the May 20th Raw, with Guerrero attacking the Texas Rattlesnake to get their program underway. The next week, a returning Chris Benoit helped Guerrero beat down Austin to end Raw, with Benoit and Guerrero joining up with Ric Flair to tie Austin's previous rivalries together. However, Austin still wasn't creatively satisfied. On May 31st, 2002, Austin appeared on Bite This Again 2.5 months since his last appearance on the show to let the world know that he wasn't only unhappy with creative, but the direction of the company as well. The bottom line is that everything sucks. I'm not happy with the way Stone Cold Steve Austin is going. I'm not happy with the way the whole company is going. The writing has been pretty substandard. I'll go one better. It's been piss poor. I guess if that pisses people off, then that's the way it is. I think it could have been a whole hell of a lot better creatively than what it has been. I wasn't happy before WrestleMania 18, and I'm not happy after WrestleMania 18 as we speak presently. Vince McMahon countered with his own Bite This appearance the next week, saying that Austin was the most demanding superstar that he's ever worked with. The June 3rd Raw saw Austin taunting the trio of Flair, Guerrero, and Benoit by urinating on Arn Anderson, Ric Flair's confidant in storyline, and in an angle that Austin was against due to the respect he had for the former Horseman member. The night ended with Austin defeating Flair in a match where the loser would become the winner's personal assistant. Little did we know, this was going to be the last appearance of Stone Cold Steve Austin for the remainder of the year. Back at Stamford, Connecticut, the WWE Raw creative team were formatting their June 10th episode. The build to WWE's next pay-per-view, King of the Ring, was in full force, and there was an idea that would hype up the tournament even more. The first ever meeting between Stone Cold Steve Austin and WWE's next big thing, Brock Lesnar. It was a typical Raw meeting on the 4th floor of Titan Towers, and we needed a main event, recalled Brian Gewirtz. Austin vs. Brock was where my mind went to first. Vince gave a pause, then said, "Damn, that's strong." Oftentimes, we don't know what to make of that. Strong as in good strong, or too strong to do for TV as opposed to a pay-per-view. Many have criticized that giving away a first-time ever matchup with no build-up in an underwhelming tournament-style setting that would leave a lot of money on the table. The writing team saw it differently. We were about to move Brock Lesnar to SmackDown while Steve was going to remain on Raw, recounts Gewirtz. This was back when we thought the brand extension would actually be held to the strictest of standards. The rationale was it would be years before we had this match again, and when we did, we'd do it right. It could potentially be a WrestleMania main event. When the time was right, we'd give Austin vs. Lesnar the proper build-up, but for now, we could get away with a huge one-night attraction. The writing team debated the pros and cons of Gewirtz's pitch. The deciding factor was popping a big rating number on Monday Night Raw. The network was getting antsy due to the brand's extension, and those in the company saw this match as a freebie. The prevailing thought was by the time they'd do the match properly, most would forget the match would happen, while those that remembered and complained about it would watch it anyway. So it was decided the finish would be Brock Lesnar defeating Steve Austin due to the interference of Eddie Guerrero, leading to the latter having a match at King of the Ring with Austin. The creative plans for June 10th, 2002 on Raw were set. Meanwhile, in Columbus, Ohio, Steve Austin was lying in his hotel room before that night's house show. Jim Ross called to give Austin the creative plans for the Raw show. After the plans were laid out, Austin's feedback was as follows. "They're going to have to change that. I ain't doing that." JR responded, "Well, that's what Vince wants to do. If they don't change it, then I'm not gonna effing be there," retorted Austin. Ross promised to call Vince while Austin wrestled a match against Ric Flair in a cage match. When Austin came back, he saw a voicemail left by Vince McMahon. "Steve, this is Vince. Give me a call no matter what time it is. Give me a call so we can talk about creative for tomorrow's show." Instead of calling McMahon right away, Austin decided to drive from Columbus to his hotel in Atlanta, Georgia, not answering his phone or making any calls until he checked into his hotel around 2 in the morning. Austin called McMahon and listened as McMahon laid out the scenario. Lesnar goes over. In a surprise finish, Austin only had one response. "Okay." McMahon was thinking that all was good, that Austin agreed to the creative, when in reality Austin was saying, "Okay, I'm fed up. Okay, this is BS." Austin saw the situation as a massive mistake business-wise. He had no problem with putting over Lesnar once the time was right. However, this creative decision was the fuse that lit the dynamite to the mountain of frustrations he was having not only professionally, but personally as well. Nobody knew Austin's health has been in decline for over the past year. His neck and back problems were worsening, while he had issues with his legs' reflexes. His marital problems with his wife Deborah were also causing him grief, while his kids from a previous marriage were moving to England. Filled with frustration, Austin called Jim Ross that he would not be attending Raw. "Here's the bottom line," said Austin. "I'm Stone Cold Steve Austin. I've drawn more money than anybody else in the business. I've sold more merchandise than anybody else in the business. I've sold more pay-per-views than anybody in the business. I'm not the first in line for Brock Lesnar. I'm the last in line. I'm happy to do business with anybody when the time is to do business. That's the money match. That's the promotion. That's the match everybody wants to see. Then, whatever the outcome is fine by me." Austin called WWE Travel and changed his flights. However, they called their bosses to see if it was okay, which tipped off WWE that Austin wouldn't be there. Deborah also called WWE personnel that she wouldn't be attending Raw either. Jim Ross called Austin to reconsider. Austin, however, was already on the plane home. With Austin out, the entire Raw show had to be rewritten. In their haste, Ric Flair turned babyface and challenged Vince McMahon in a match to determine the sole owner of WWE, with Brock Lesnar helping McMahon win the match. Eddie Guerrero, Steve Austin's planned opponent for King of the Ring, was then placed in a match with a former ally, Ric Flair, instead. Storylines were rushed, alignments were changed to cover for WWE's biggest star for walking out. Brock Lesnar later revealed on a podcast with Steve Austin that he didn't take Steve Austin's walkout personally, and figured Steve had a legitimate reason to leave when he did. This wasn't the same feeling when Austin walked out of WrestleMania 18. The feeling was that the walkout could last a couple months, even years. WWE posted a piece on their show WWE Confidential about the situation where the phrase that Austin took his ball and went home was hammered into the viewing audience. The narrative, led by Vince McMahon and JR Jim Ross, was that Austin let the fans down and didn't handle business the right way. "I thought that's what I needed to do," said Austin in his first interview with WWE Magazine after the walkout. JR said that was the dumbest thing you ever did, or that was the biggest mistake you ever made, and I'm living with it. Whether it was a mistake or whatever, I did what I thought I needed to do, and I can't go back in time and change it. There were people that took Austin's side due to the poor creative that was happening in WWE in that period of time. Others thought it was selfish, putting the company in a tough position when they were already on a downturn. Regardless, this is where the story takes a dark turn. 1 week after Steve Austin walked out, the San Antonio Police Department received a distressing call from Austin's wife, Deborah, claiming that Austin attacked her and Austin left the scene. When police showed up, Austin called the house twice and spoke to police, however, refused to come home. Deborah declined to press any charges for this incident, so the police left. On August 13th, Austin turned himself into the police department and was booked on a charge of assault causing bodily harm, a Class A misdemeanor. Even though Deborah declined to file charges, the police department had enough evidence to pursue the charge and issue a warrant for Austin's arrest. Austin was released after posting a $5,000 bond. If convicted of this crime, Austin would serve a maximum of a year in prison and a $4,000 fine maximum. Austin would later file for divorce on July 22, 2002. WWE reported the incident on their website, furthering the divide between the two parties. About a month after the incident, Austin received a card from Jim Ross in the mail that said the following: "I'm here. If you need anything, don't hesitate to call me, JR." That night, Austin and Ross talked for 2 hours about a number of subjects, but one subject caught Austin's ear. Ross brought up a possible meeting between Austin and McMahon and hash everything out. Austin was still questioning his future, if he was really done with wrestling, if he really wanted to leave on a down note. After pondering his options, Austin took the meeting with McMahon. September 30th, 2002, Monday Night Raw emanated from Houston, Texas. Prior to that night's events, Steve Austin was on his way to meet with Vince McMahon. Steve Austin sat in the Westin Hotel at the Galleria in Houston watching ESPN when Vince McMahon walked in. Many months ago, they were boss and disgruntled employee. Was the tension between them still there? They walked towards each other, hugged, and shook hands. After some beating around the bush, Vince McMahon asked Austin what happened. Austin disclosed his creative frustrations, but not his health problems. Austin wasn't ready to disclose that, especially during his first meeting with McMahon post-walkout. On November 25th, 2002, Steve Austin pleaded no contest to his previous charges. He was given a year's probation, a $1,000 fine, and ordered to 80 hours of community service. Steve Austin officially returned to WWE on February 10th, 2003 in an untelevised segment with Chris Jericho. And on February 23rd, 2003, at No Way Out, the pay-per-view, Austin pinned Raw General Manager Eric Bischoff in Austin's first match back with WWE. Later, Vince McMahon sat Stone Cold down and was going to give him a fine. A $650K fine for missing all his events and merchandise sales. Austin later talked the fine down to $250,000. Steve Austin was then programmed into a feud with The Rock heading into WrestleMania 19. Even prior to driving up to Seattle for the event, Austin knew that this would be his final match in WWE. The day before the showcase of the Immortals, Austin's health problems hit their apex. Austin had a habit at the time of drinking 3 to 5 energy drinks a day along with 1 to 2 pots of coffee. After a workout with Kevin Nash that saw his foot flopping around on the recumbent bike, Austin began feeling off walking into the hotel room elevator. Initially, he thought it was an anxiety attack, then feared it was even worse, a heart attack. Austin is quickly taken to the hospital with 5 bags of fluid attached to him, with the average person only receiving 2 for dehydration. The doctors were afraid that Steve Austin was suffering from a pulmonary embolism, a blood clot in the lungs. Thankfully, everything turned out well and Austin wrestled The Rock less than 18 hours later. When the referee hit his hand for 3 on the mat as The Rock defeated Stone Cold, a weight was lifted. There was no more pressure for Steve Austin. No need to be the top guy. The company he helped build would move on without him. Despite the creative differences, the walkouts, the personal struggles, the health issues, Steve Austin walking out of WWE changed the company in a lot of ways. With Austin gone, there was an open spot to be filled. Many stars attempted to fill the void, but if anyone succeeded, that's a different debate. Steve Austin walking out caused a domino effect on how WWE built their stars and the creative that came with it. Some still maintain that Austin was right for standing his ground and walking out. Austin, however, maintains that walking out was the biggest mistake of his professional career. 19 years later, Steve Austin came out of retirement and wrestled Kevin Owens at WrestleMania 38, Night 1. I'm sure you'll have many thoughts on the events that took place and how they impacted Austin, WWE, the fans, and those close to Austin. Austin took his ball and went home, and then brought the ball back. Will we see Stone Cold Steve Austin return for a match in WWE again? The ball is in Austin's court.